Hi, and welcome to Genre Chat. Today, our special guest is a preacher, a teacher, a singer, an artist, a musician, and a children's book writer and illustrator. His name is PK Hallinan. Welcome, PK. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about myself, gosh.
Or a lot of it.
Well, I've been writing children's books for about 45 years, and I've sold about very close to 10 million of them by now. And what I like about them is they have, I think, very uplifting themes. From the very beginning of my writing career, I wanted to write books that actually helped people, not just entertain them, but gave them values, certain things to look at to help improve their lives, both the children and adults. So I've always written books for the child and the adult and the child, and hope that they grew through what they read.
Wonderful. How did you choose this genre, and how did you get into writing children's books?
It's kind of an interesting story. I was working in corporate America, a very young man. I think I was about only 23 years old, and I was bored to death. And I thought, what is this? You know, you work every day, you make money, you put it in the bank, you spend it. You work every day, you put money in the bank, you spend it, and this is life. This is and I had a desire, and I've had a desire most of my life, to do something important with the time I've been given. And I didn't become a Christian until I was about 50 years old. So it wasn't tied into that. It was just tied into something the Lord had put on my heart very, very early, which is, leave a footprint, leave a mark, let people know you were here. And I knew I wasn't doing that. So I stayed up all night long. I was living in LA thinking about it. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And when morning had come, I had decided to become a great novelist, because I figured, what could be easier? You write a great book, you make lots of money, and touch lives. So I wrote a couple, 3 novels that were just terrible, and they're now in a landfill in Kearney Mesa, California. But along that way, my Christmas was coming, and my wife came to me and she said, you're a writer, and she thought I was anyway. You're a writer. Why don't you write our children a Christmas book for Christmas as a gift? And I had never thought about writing children's books, never even considered it. But I thought, well, okay. So I put together some little materials, and I wrote a book called Kenny and Mikey Meet the Jungle People, a great adventure about my 2 sons wandering into the dark and scary jungle. And make a long story short, when neighbors and friends came over on Christmas, they saw the book and they just flipped out over it. They said, this is really good. Have you ever thought about writing children's books? And I hadn't, but I like to tell people I'm highly motivated by praise. So when they said something nice about me, I thought, well, maybe I ought to think about it. So I did, and about a month later, I wrote a book called How Really Great to Walk This Way, just about enjoying the things that we already have in life that we just don't think about, just kind of being thankful for what we've already been given. And this is remarkable. I looked up a publisher in a book called The Writer's Market, and the publisher was called Children's Press. They were in Chicago. They don't exist anymore. But I thought, well, good enough for me. And I sent it off to Children's Press, and they bought it. The first book I sent ever to the first publisher in my entire life got published. And I really never looked back. But what happened, the important part of that particular story is they liked my book, but they didn't like my art. And they had another artist re-illustrate the book. And he was a good illustrator, but he missed the point. He didn't understand what the book was really about. And it was illustrated more like you'd expect an arithmetic book to be illustrated, with pictures that get the work done, but they don't have any emotion. They don't have any work. They don't have any way of relating to people. And when I saw that book, I was so disappointed. I made a vow that very day to never let that happen again, that no matter what, I would illustrate my books until they were good enough to be published. And I started a new book called The Looking Book, all about these kids being their mother coming in and saying, "Stop watching so much TV. Go on and look at the world." And so they, because they're looking, they see things they've never seen before. Anyway, they bought that book too, and they accepted my artwork, and it started me on my way as both an artist and a writer and an illustrator of children's books, and I've never looked back really.
Well, now, a question that I like to ask is, should a children's book author illustrate their own books? Is that the norm?
That's a great question. No, it is not the norm. And in fact, people have trouble understanding this, but most publishers do not want a manuscript to be sent along with art unless the author is illustrating it themselves. They don't want accompanying art. They want to be able to read the manuscript and pick out of their group of artists someone they think will do a good job on the book. But almost everybody that I've ever known has either had a friend or a relative do the illustrations, and or they've done them themselves. Now, if you do the artwork yourself, it's acceptable. They will look at that. But the trouble is, most people don't really understand art, and they don't. But I will tell you that generally art is not the problem. Generally, the writing is the problem. Generally, people have nothing to say, and it's because they underestimate the difficulty of writing an interesting children's book. They think it's as simple as the story that they entertain their kids with right before bed that they make up as they go along, and it works at home with your kids, but when you try to translate it into something that can be published, it just doesn't have anything. It doesn't have a core to it. And I taught writing for a good, gosh, I don't even know how long, maybe 20 years all told. And the biggest problem that I ever saw was not the illustrating, it was the writing. That people had nothing to say. And it is important to have something to say. Once you've got something to say, the illustrating becomes a matter of trying to give people something that goes beyond just being a picture, that creates a relationship with the reader and a relationship with the internal characters. And I was highly motivated by a number of illustrators. In fact, on my wall you can't see him, but I got a Norman Rockwell right above my desk, because Norman Rockwell to me was the ultimate illustrator who had a sense of something about to happen. You know, you see this young Army recruit coming this way, this pretty girl coming this way around them, and you know they're going to collide, and you know something's going to happen, but you don't know exactly what. But he sets up a little bit of tension, a little bit of interaction. That sort of thing is very important in illustrating, to have something going on. And that is one of the things that I have used in my illustrating career, is there's always something going on in the picture that maybe not even the main point, but maybe a dog and a cat staring each other down while you're going, with the main story. Just something to make it real, to give it a sense of something being, happening it brings it to life is what it does.
Now, are there different illustrations or colors or things you would use for different age groups when you do board books or, other children's books?
In my career, and I've been fairly blessed in my career. I've had about 89 books published now, something like that. I've lost track, actually. But I have never compromised either my writing or my pictures in lieu of age. I simply do the best I can. I draw the best I can. I use the same basic characters in every single book. They look a little bit like Charles Schulz's characters. I wrote Charles Schulz a letter one day, and I sent him a copy of my book. Today is Halloween, because it was some of the best art I'd ever done. And I said, people are always telling me my art looks like yours, and I want to apologize. I did not mean to do that, but I read your books my whole life growing up, and I think I was influenced. And he wrote the kindest letter back to me. Saying, your books are very unique, and you're doing a wonderful job. Keep with it. That sort of a thing. good
Oh,
man.
what a nice letter.
Yes,
What a
he was
nice
wonderful. But
compliment.
the kids are always yelling out Charlie Brown when I illustrate. My character, I call him Little PK, but
I
I,
like your illustrations. I've looked at some of your books. I really like the illustrations.
I'm pleased to say I think almost everybody I know enjoys my illustrations, and I think that it's because I understand human emotion. I know what people like.
Mm.
I know what makes them laugh. I have since I was in the second grade. I used to do stand up for the rest of the class in second grade because I knew what it was that gets to them. I just I've been gifted with an understanding. That's why I am a singer. I'm a writer. I can do any of the performing arts, including preaching, which in a sense is a performing art. It
Hmm.
just comes naturally to me, and I put all of that into my illustrations. That my illustrations become a performing art as well. I want the art to be very, very, very enjoyable and something that, in fact, I'll share you something kind of interesting with you. I wrote a book called No, I'm Thankful Each Day, and I was living in Pacific Beach in San Diego at the time, and this gal came over and she brought her 8-month-old child. And while we were talking, I gave them the book, I'm Thankful Each Day, to look through. And every time that child's mother turned the page, the little 8-month-old baby would go, oh, ooh.
Oh,
I
wow.
have told people I've never been more highly complimented in my life. Kids
That's
really have a clue.
wonderful.
Yeah, that's the ultimate. When little kids are fascinated with your art and
Yes.
they don't need the story to even to make it interesting. They just look at it and they go, ooh, ah. Where
Now
were we?
you said that art kind of comes natural to you. Did you hone your skills at all to get your artwork? Um,
Let's say, communication comes naturally to me. Art, I knew nothing about when I started drawing. I I was really very rough. I didn't know how to draw. I had never had any art lessons, which is why my first book got turned down as far as the art went. But when I started my second book, I made a vow to myself. I'm going to work on this until it's good enough for publication. And what happened was, it was a 32-page book. I went through the book and I drew the best I could draw, trying to make it usable. And when I got to the end of the book, I noticed something a little disheartening, which was this. I had improved so much in the course of writing, illustrating that book, that the whole second half of the book was better than the first half of the book. And I had a
ah,
decision to make. Do I go back and re-illustrate the first 16 pages? And if I do that, what if they're better than the last 16 pages? Because this could go on forever. But I made a decision, and I share it with the kids when I go out to schools. You don't deserve to be successful if you don't turn in your best work. And so I went back and I made it the best I could. And fortunately, it wasn't better than the second half. But what I learned is this, and this is what I share with kids all over America when I speak. I have learned, even though I'm not an artist, they argue that with me. Yes, you are, PK. No, I'm not. I am not an artist, but I have learned one very important fact. If I am willing to sit there long enough, drawing and erasing, drawing and erasing, drawing and erasing, drawing and erasing, someday, somehow, something surfaces, which is usable. Not great, usable, but sometimes something surfaces which is unbelievably good. But it's a matter of you just keep drawing and erasing, drawing. Don't give up. Don't quit. It will happen. I tell people I make art happen. I am not a natural
oh, I
artist.
like that.
I
It's sort of like it's like the writing process. With writing, you have to write and edit, and you just keep writing and editing. Now, as a children's book author, do you have visions in your head when you're writing the story as to how you would want to illustrate it? Do you already have those?
That's a great question. Absolutely, I do. In fact, it's funny. I'm working on a 4-book series right now, where I did writing several years ago, and my publisher wanted to have my work re-illustrated to see what impact that might have on the market. And the books were illustrated by anybody. I mean, there was no heart, there was no feeling. And so now I'm going back, and they wanted me to re-illustrate all 4 of these books because I had written them and they think they blew it, which they did. My problem is getting back into my mental space. Where was I when I was writing these? Because generally when I'm writing a book, I am envisioning the text that's going to accompany it. And when I'm all done, I have and in fact, I structure it in certain ways in my mind. I have the whole thing kind of laid out that I'm going to do a 2-page spread here because we're getting tired of single pages, and here I'm going to do something. And I'm hoping that I can recall all of that. I just started doing this. This is all due by, I think, September 15th or something. But I'm redoing the covers and having kind of a hard time getting the emotion back that I had when I was writing. Because I pour out my emotions into my art. That's why people like it. They feel the emotion of the artwork. They feel if something's a little sad, they feel that. And I don't just illustrate. I really pour out who I am, what I think, what I feel, what I think everyone's feeling, the relationships of who's feeling what. Basically, everything I can think of that goes into making the picture, even though it's a cartoon, very much alive.
Yes.
So, yes, I do think about what I'm going to draw as I'm writing.
Now, have you ever illustrated for another author?
No, and I refuse to. I have no interest in it. To tell you the truth, this is going to sound I almost hesitate to say this, but I have found this to be true. Having taught writing for so many years, I have found that there are very, 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 very few good writers out there of children's books. I don't know about better books. I don't know about novels, but I find that people underestimate the difficulty level of writing a really good children's book. They don't understand that the book needs a point. It needs a purpose. It needs some reason other than just sheer entertainment. Now, there are some children's books that are just plain entertainment and they're delightful, but mostly they're not. Mostly the books I have read are kind of about nothing. They're supposed to be adventures, but an adventure is not simply a series of exciting collisions. An adventure is maintained by a certain place you've got to get to make everything come out right. In fact, I call it suspense, and I like to ask my students, what is the suspense of The Wizard of Oz? What's the suspense? And you know what the suspense is? Dorothy's got to get home.
Yep.
And the rest of it almost has nothing to do with anything. They're all ingredients to the suspense that is built into the book. And if you don't have that, you don't have page turnability. And so that's and most people don't realize that who write children's books, at least newer writers. They don't realize that element of page turnability is very important. It's like Where the Wild Things Are. You know, the kid goes off into the Where the Wild, but he's got to get back.
Yep.
And it keeps the book moving. Otherwise, it's just a kid swinging around with a bunch of monsters. But anyway, I don't know what your question was.
Well, no, I appreciate the difficulty of writing children's books. I've learned never to say never because I said I wasn't going to write fiction, and now I'm writing a fiction book. But I don't aspire to write children's books because they are difficult. There's so many of them out there, and the ones that grab your attention are exactly like what you said. Now, I want to ask you, we're going to wrap it up here in about 6 to 8 minutes, but who is your favorite character in your books and why? And can you describe the personality of that character?
Yeah, I can tell you real quickly. His name is Little PK, and he's based on me when I was about 5 years old. And what happened, just so you know, in the beginning, my characters were my 2 sons, Ken and Mike. They were that time 6 years old when I started. But after a while, they got pretty big. And I couldn't use them as my models anymore, so I thought, what can I do? And then I had a picture of myself at about that age that I wanted. So I draw myself in it as a little kid named PK, and the other characters have become regular characters in the book, and there are about 6 regular characters. I try to keep it multicultural because I like to have a little something for everybody, and I think that's important. I think people should be able to find themselves in your book if that's at all possible. Let me share one other thing with you if I can. Again, about the writing process. When I was first writing, I was walking down the street and I saw this dump truck drive by, full of gravel. And on the side of the dump truck, they had this slogan, "Find a hole and fill it." And I saw that and I thought to myself, that's really interesting. I'm going to do that as a writer. I'm going to find the holes and fill them. I'm going to find what kids need, what families need, what parents need, and fill it. And I still do that. I look for what helps. What do we need? What patches the hole? What fixes the dent? What, how does all of this come together? But anyway, my characters have sort of grown up with me, and there is a standard cast of characters now that are in all the books. And I'm going to be challenged in these books that I'm doing today because I'm going to get into some characters that I haven't had before, so that'll be kind of interesting.
Oh, that is such a great piece of advice, PK, is find the hole and fill it, because I read submissions for an agent and I get probably a quarter of the stuff I get is stuff that's already been written, and some of them are even the same book title as other books. So it really is. It's a wonderful piece of advice. Fill the hole. That's great advice. Now, before we wrap it up, I wanted to ask you, what advice do you give to children's book authors and illustrators?
What advice?
Yeah, what's your best piece of advice besides fill the hole?
Well, it's still the same thing. Have something to say. And in the sense of, if you can write, my favorite book I've written to date, by the way, I have 2 of them. One is How Do I Love You? It's about how much I love your child. And I wrote that for my own sons long ago. But since then, I wrote a new book called Heartprints. And the definition on the cover is heartprint, the impression left behind by a deliberate act of kindness.
Ooh, I like that.
And it talks about how many heartprints will you leave today? Will you chat with a friend? Will you give hugs away? And it goes through how you can leave something wonderful behind. And a good pastor friend of mine read it, and he said, PK, that reminds me of the 23rd Psalm where it says, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow all my life." And that's what I think you should be thinking of as a children's author. Are goodness and mercy following you? What's left behind? What's in your wake? How has the world improved by what you've done, where you've been, who you've spoken to? In other words, you as an artist are you're gifted with something that can help other people have better lives and hopefully find salvation. So that's my advice, is have something worthwhile to say that helps people.
Thank you, PK. Can you tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you? Or do you have a website? Do you want them to follow you on Facebook?
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me really is on Facebook. I have a website, but I almost never use it. It's kind of gone south along with the whole thing on Facebook, where you basically have a website on Facebook anyway. And you can message me, you can, whatever it takes. But Facebook is generally what I recommend.
So it's PK, and Hallinan is Hallinan.
Absolutely correct.
Wonderful. PK, it's been so wonderful talking to you. We want to thank you for being our guest. Genre Chat will return again this time next week. Thank you for joining us.